The story of Joseph. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob and the firstborn of Rachel, his beloved wife. He was highly favored by his father, who gave him a beautiful multicolored coat. This favoritism stirred envy and hatred among his 10 older brothers. The plot against Joseph. Joseph had dreams that symbolized his future greatness, where his brothers and even his parents bowed to him. Sharing these dreams only deepened his brothers' resentment. One day, as Joseph went to check on his brothers in the fields, they plotted to kill him. However, Reuben, the eldest, convinced them to throw him into a pit instead, intending to rescue him later. While Reuben was away, the brothers sold Joseph to a caravan of Ishmaelite traders traveling to Egypt. They smeared his coat with goat's blood and showed it to Jacob, leading him to believe Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Despite being a slave, Joseph excelled in all he did because God was with him. Potiphar noticed his skills and made him head of his household. However, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of attempting to seduce her when he resisted her advances. This led to his imprisonment. Even in prison, Joseph found favor. The prison warden entrusted him with responsibilities, and Joseph continued to thrive. While in prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. The cupbearer was restored to his position as Joseph predicted, but he forgot about Joseph until Pharaoh had troubling dreams. 2 years later, when Pharaoh sought someone to interpret his dreams, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams as a warning of 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. He advised Pharaoh to store surplus grain during the years of abundance. Impressed by his wisdom, Pharaoh made Joseph the governor of Egypt, second only to himself. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to buy grain. They did not. The reunion of Joseph and his family. The famine that Joseph had predicted struck not only Egypt but the surrounding nations, including Canaan, where his father Jacob and brothers lived. Desperate for food, Jacob sent his 10 older sons to Egypt to buy grain, keeping his youngest son, Benjamin, at home to protect him. When Joseph saw his brothers among the crowds seeking food, he immediately recognized them, though they did not recognize him. It had been over 20 years since they sold him into slavery. Joseph spoke harshly to them, disguising his identity to test their character and see if they had changed. Joseph accused his brothers of being spies. They denied the accusation, explaining that they were 12 brothers, sons of one man, and that the youngest was at home while the other was no more. Joseph's heart ached at this mention of himself, but he continued his plan to test them. He demanded they prove their honesty by bringing their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. To ensure their return, he detained Simeon as a hostage and sent the others home with sacks of grain. Unknown to them, Joseph had secretly returned their money in their sacks. When the brothers discovered the money, they were terrified, fearing they would be accused of theft. Back in Canaan, Jacob was distraught at the thought of losing Benjamin and refused to send him, despite the brothers' pleas. The second journey to Egypt. When the famine worsened, Jacob reluctantly agreed to send Benjamin, trusting God for their safe return. Judah pledged to take personal responsibility for Benjamin's safety. They returned to Egypt with gifts and double the money to repay what had been found in their sacks. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his full brother, he was overwhelmed with emotion and had to leave the room to weep. He arranged a feast for his brothers but gave Benjamin 5 times as much food, testing their feelings toward him. The final test. Before sending them home with grain, Joseph instructed his steward to place his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. After they departed, Joseph sent his men to overtake them and accuse them of theft. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers were brought back to Joseph. Judah, showing great change, offered himself as a slave in place of Benjamin, pleading for mercy and expressing concern for their father's grief. This display of love and responsibility deeply moved Joseph. Joseph reveals his identity. Unable to contain his emotions, Joseph ordered everyone except his brothers to leave the room. He wept loudly and declared, "I am Joseph. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers were stunned and terrified, fearing his revenge. Joseph reassured them, saying, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." He explained how God had used their actions to position him to preserve their family during the famine. Joseph sent his brothers back to Canaan with wagons and provisions to bring their father and their families to Egypt. When Jacob learned that Joseph was alive and ruler of Egypt, he was overwhelmed with joy and disbelief. He exclaimed, "I will go and see him before I die." Jacob and his entire household, 70 in total, journeyed to Egypt. When Joseph saw his father, he threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. Jacob declared, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph settled his family in the land of Goshen, a fertile area in Egypt. He ensured they had everything they needed, including food and protection during the remaining years of famine. Despite the past, Joseph's forgiveness and love united the family once more. This reunion is a powerful reminder of the healing power of forgiveness, the sovereignty of God in using trials for good, and the importance of family bonds.